couple of years ago, there was a pro-life activist who would go through dumpsters behind abortion clinics. And he would collect their bodies out of the dumpsters so that they could have a funeral and a burial, and so they would get the respect and death that they never received in life. And I was speaking at this conference, and after the conference, he told me there was something that he wanted me to see. When I got to his place, he told me that he'd been through the dumpster behind an abortion clinic, and then he handed me a jar. The jar was about this big, and in the jar it was a little boy, and he was perfectly formed. And it's really weird how memory works, because I can actually still feel in my hands the sensory memory of his head and his arms bumping the sides of the jar as I was sitting there kind of in shock, trying to figure out what it was, because your brain doesn't even really have the ability to really conceptualize the sentence "a baby in a jar." It doesn't make any sense, even when you say it out loud at first. And so I kind of put the jar down on the table, and I was completely stunned. My mind was racing, and I couldn't figure out how to process it. And then I looked at the lid of the jar, and on the lid were two things. It was the name of the abortionist who had killed him, and it was the name of the place where he died. He actually looked like he was sleeping. You had to look really closely to figure out what was wrong with him. It was only when you turned the jar a certain way, and you could see that right in the back of his head, a hole had been punched in the back of his head where the abortionist tool had gone in and then had pulled him from his mother's womb. And looking at this lid, I remember thinking so many times, especially when I started out doing pro-life work, so many Christians would say things like, "Why do you care about real children?" Or, it's what abortion activists and abortion supporters tell us all the time, right? "Why do you care about the real orphans? Why can't you find something better to do?" And I remember sitting there and looking at the lid of this jar and thinking, is there anybody in our society more orphaned than a little boy who is so cut off from every natural family and every natural affection that the only ways we have to identify him are the name of the person who killed him and the name of the place where he died? Nobody in our society is more orphaned than that. Nobody. There are so many popular causes right now. There are so many people that are willing to stand up for the victims of this injustice or that injustice, and I'm happy they're doing it, but there are so few people willing to stand up for little boys who end up in jars that nobody cares about, not even their own parents. But there's something else that I think of often when I remember holding that baby who had been killed by abortion, is that baby also had the right to our defense. As a tiny, vulnerable member of our society, he not only had the right to life, he also had the right to our defense. And so as people who know what abortion is, as pro-life people who realize what abortion is, we should remember that each of those babies that die every day in Canada not only have the right to life that's being violated by the government, by the abortion workers, by the people who are walking them into the clinics, they also have the right to our defense. And that's where our responsibility comes in.